I'll give a couple more minutes for some others to start jumping in. Katie or Amber, do you know how many people responded to this?
Unfortunately, I don't. This is Katie. Unfortunately, I don't. The way that I sent the meeting out, it didn't record people's responses, so I'm not sure.
Okay, or you just sent it like Brutus to everyone?
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll get started and people jump on a little later. It's not the end of the world. So this is the company standards and procedures for QAQC in the office. Pretty much yearly, we do this once a year, maybe. It's encouraged for new hires and people who have never been in the training before. It's kind of a regurgitated process. I've updated it a little bit based on some of the new formats and structures in the office, but for generally speaking, it's kind of the same. But to start, here's an overview. We're going to go over some goals. We're going to establish some responsibilities and roles for each person. We're going to go over the procedure, the requirements, how to make a submittal. And I say this every year. The next one is the documentation of the submittal. That's one of the most important processes. And the examples and some resources that are available on our P drive for some of the forms and stuff. So the goals, it's 4 parts and they're very high level. The first is basically just to ensure the highest quality product is delivered that exceeds clients' expectations. So it's on time, within budget. That's pretty high level stuff and it's pretty self-explanatory. But some of these, the next two are more detailed and a little more important because they kind of ensure the first goal is met. But we want to identify potential submittal conflicts, whether it be overloading of staff, tons of projects that are submitted on around the same time, staffing issues. We want to identify that as early as possible before it becomes a problem. We want to reduce our extra work orders, schedule delays, claims, all of the above. And then the last but not the least is we want to reduce review comments or the number of review comments in order to expedite approval processes. If every time we're submitting a milestone or concept development or site development, and we're continuously getting 4 or 5 pages of comments, it's just a daunting task to continuously go over and resubmit because that by itself generates extra work orders, schedule delays, overworking of staff. So the more efficient we can make submittals to reduce comments, 1, 2, and 3 kind of by itself plays it out. So those are our goals. How do we accomplish these goals? The first is communication. I can't stress this part of it enough. Being a department director or an entry-level engineer, the more that we talk about projects and what's going on and what the issues are and certain things that are causing delays, the better. The second part is collaboration. Most of the people here or most of our projects require interdiscipline projects where we have structures, we have highway, we have traffic, we have water resources. All of them have a piece of the pie. So the more that we can collaborate with them, the better. That ties in with communication. And the last part is accountability. If you're given a task to submit something by a certain date, or you're given X amount of hours to do something, or as a PM, you've told your staff that I'm going to bring in more resources to help. If everybody has some sort of accountability to that, it really, really helps the development of a project. And the goal is to kind of meet in the middle there and have a piece of all three on one project. And ultimately that leads to success, but this is just a short way of saying teamwork. Projects, these goals, everything can be accomplished if we work as a team and not as an individual. So the responsibilities and roles. So the QAQC manager used to be me in my current role. That's not there anymore. So really the managers of these things is left up to the department director within each discipline. They're there to ensure the program is being implemented. They want to resolve and identify scheduling conflicts based on workloads or other issues. Schedule the submittal dates for QAQC well in advance, give project status updates, and ensure the PMs are properly documenting these files as they go through the process. And then I'll get into this a little bit later, but if schedule dictates, they'll perform the department review of these submittal documents. The project manager has a laundry list of things that they're supposed to be going over. I'm going to highlight a few of them here. One is performing routine quality checks of engineers' work. The worst thing that we can do is assign work to an engineer and then 40 hours later they kind of check in to see where they're at. It's best to, like, this goes back to the goals, communicate daily with your engineers, just give them guidance, check in on how they're doing, and just make sure they're not going off to they're deviating from the correct path, because most of if in engineering world, if you go 40 hours in the wrong direction, it's going to take you 80 hours to correct it. So there's a lot. It's easier to do it right the first time than it is to de-engineer it and go back in time and kind of make changes. So providing those routine quality checks of an engineer's work is very, very important. The next is having some sort of pre-milestone or intermediate design submittal reviews of major elements to a project. And I've highlighted a few there: drainage area mapping, TC pass, horizontal vertical alignments, bridge type size and spans. During when those decisions are being made, it is vital that everybody's on board, and that includes the clients as well. So as we're developing some of those initial design components, it's best that the PM is working directly with the project engineer at these pre-milestone or major design decisions, and we're coordinating the work and we're making sure everything is up to speed and everybody's aware of some of the decisions we're making, because if a surprise occurs right before 30% submittal and we got to revise drainage area maps and our horizontal alignment has to get changed, those are major design revisions that would have been better to have been caught as it's being developed. And the last one here is client and sub correspondence coordination. The client aspect of it, making sure, if they send an email asking for something and it will take you a few days to get them an answer, at least responding to them right away saying, hey, I received your email and we'll get you an answer by Friday, something to that extent. And then hounding our subs because they're a representation of our work. And if they're lagging, and I know some subs are easier to work with than others, but that is a big component to being a project manager, is making sure our subs work kind of falls in line with our expectations. Project engineer and then design engineer, your roles. I don't need to read all these here. You can read them, but I'm going to highlight a few. Notifying your PM of any design issues, constraints as it occurs. This goes back to the communication and the teamwork component. If you're laying curb and gutter or, some drainage system, or you're putting piers over streams, whatever it is, and you come across some sort of issue and you're not sure what to do, whether it be because of a utility impact or you're not quite sure if it meets standards, or you're just maybe a little confused on what exactly the best route is, just go talk to your PM. Let them know this is exactly what I'm doing. And here's my issues. Don't just assume you're going the right direction. So have that communication right away. Secondly is seek guidance and just ask questions. Sometimes when you're doing plan development, it's very complex and maybe you're not sure of why you're doing something, or you're not sure of the end game. When you're starting a project, it may make sense in your head of how to do something, but if you don't have the knowledge of what exactly you're trying to get to, it's kind of hard to see the whole plan development progression. So ask questions, seek guidance, say like, why am I doing this before I'm doing that? And through experience, hopefully some of these questions that you ask will help you gain that knowledge. And the last but not least is learn from mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes. I'm sure everyone on this call has made plenty of mistakes. It happens. It is not like the end all be all, but the goal is to take those lessons and learn from them so that the next project or the next phase of a project, you aren't continuously making the same mistakes and you learn from them. So procedures. When is QAQC required? In a nutshell, all submittals of any level that leave the office should have some level of review being done by another person. There's different levels of them. There's a formal QAQC, which is more time. It requires more time and more effort. It's 4 steps. There's checklists. There's documentation. The whole array of requirements. There's also department reviews, and there's over-shoulder reviews, peer reviews, and intermediate progress reviews. The bottom 4 don't necessarily require a formal process of documentation, and it's kind of in line with maybe what the PM wants, but those bottom 3 are the most common ones, and those are the ones that hopefully occur daily or at least weekly between the project manager and the design engineers and the project engineers, so that the PM is taught up to speed on the daily progress of a plan, so that they aren't, left in the dark when they go to review a actual submittal. The worst thing we want to do is have a PM seeing something for the first time right before a submittal. So those kind of daily, weekly reviews that hopefully are being done. So when is a formal QAQC required? Basically, your typical milestones, your 30%, your semifinals, final review for bridges, the TS&Ls, foundation, PS&E, your major milestones for projects. That's when a formal is required. In addition, the second component to all this is the permit submissions, which is very time consuming, but they have to go through the same, concept, site, final. When you go through a county permit agency for soil conservation, those will all kind of go through the same procedures, and when a formal QAQC is required. When is a formal not required? And this is, again, not to say that QAQC is not required for it. It's just some of these instances, we don't need to go through the formal 4 steps, documentation of everything, and spend days and weeks doing it. The first is a resubmittal. Sometimes if a formal QAQC, we uncovered major design changes, then a resubmittal may have to go back through the formal QAQC. It depends, it's case by case, but if, during our internal QAQC, we made wholesale changes to a project design, it may have to go back through that formal process. But if we just have minor revisions requested by a client or an agency, during our concept development submittal for stormwater management, we made a submission, we went through formal QAQC, we have it documented, and then the client comes back and has a few minor changes, whether it be, text or, clarification on a few things. We don't have to go back through that whole process again, make the changes, resubmit, just document it. Intermediate non-milestone submittals. So sometimes a client or a project may entail to make a submission, and maybe a 10% progress submission, or a design coordination submission where we're kind of floating different alternatives or ideas, and we just want to email the client, here's a couple options. We don't need to go through a formal intermediate QAQC for that. Sometimes with sub-consultants, we don't have to go through that whole thing, and with some utility submittals. So we don't have to do that for every single thing, but it still has to be reviewed by somebody. And the last is certain types of projects, it's a case by case. Some traffic signal projects where they're, only $5,000 or $6,000 tasks, and they're in and out very quickly. Some type of pre-TS&L structure reports or floodplain studies, small resurfacing projects, or something under 5,000 square feet. Those are case by case, but those are some that may not require a formal process. Who performs these? Even though I said it's not going through the formal process, it still has to get reviewed. That's not to say that you can just make these submittals arbitrarily. It's the responsibility of the project manager or department director, however they want to work those, but it still has to get reviewed by some other person. The formal process, the first step, a peer review. The project engineer submits documents to the PM for a peer review to ensure that the product is complete, accurate, and ready to go through the process. This is kind of that first step where I was saying, if the project manager hasn't had a set of eyes on something in weeks or months or 40 hours of work by somebody, this is where this process could get snagged and delays because the project manager may not be aware of X, Y, and Z that was done. So if they're talking with that project engineer during the development of it, there should be no surprises here. So this should be a fairly smooth and quick review here. In theory, that's the goal. The project engineer completes the appropriate milestone submittal checklist according to discipline. I'll go over that in a few slides after this. Intermediate progress submittals should all be reviewed by the PM. The peer review process is mostly done by the PM and project engineer. And this should be more of a macroscopic review, and it should be focused on completeness, the way it looks, if it's clean, if it's legible, if the CAD standards are up to speed. Because I've said we can submit a project that is entirely an incorrect design. It doesn't work. It won't meet standards and so on and so forth. But if it looks nice, we probably won't generate as many comments as you would think, is if it's prepared in a sense where the reviewer can understand and it's clean, there's no text overlaps, and the shading is nice and everything looks nice. Whereas we can submit a perfect design and it's efficient, it's cost effective, and there's it meets standards, but if it looks like it's very confusing to read. It has all kinds of text conflicts. It has the CAD standards don't meet. We'll probably generate more comments from that type of submittal versus just having a full-blown incorrect design, which is sad to say, but our presentation of a submittal is very, very important. And basically it's up to the PM to determine for this peer review what exactly they want. Do they want a full-blown sets of review? Do they want to look at just certain types of things? But it's up to the PM to communicate that with the PE. Step 2, department review. After the project engineer addresses any comments from the peer review with the PM, they can make a package for the department director. This is important because most of our projects are multidisciplined, where we have a highway component, we have a water resources component, we have a structures component, and we have to make sure all 3, 4, whatever, how many disciplines are involved in a project actually have gone through that process. And it's unfair for the highway team, let's say, to go through this process and make sure everything's reviewed, but maybe water resources just skips over, makes a submittal without anybody seeing it. And then when the PM sees the final package, he sees all these errors on the water resources plans or on the structures plans. So it's very important that each department signs off on their package of the project. And if that's not being done, that goes right back to the goals of a project, where we're going to have delays, we're going to have schedule conflicts, and we're going to have potential extra work orders because maybe we're not doing our job to meet quality control. But anyway, once it is approved, so once it's submitted, the department director goes through this process of that revised set. And when I say department director, I don't mean it doesn't have to be that person specifically. He can assign another PM to maybe actually review the plans, or somebody else in that department if scheduling doesn't work out for a certain project. As long as somebody else other than the PM and the project engineer are reviewing it, that can be divvied out to have a third party set of eyes on a project. But each department has to go through that process for their specific plan set so that they are ensuring that each one of the things that are going into our set has gone through the approval. And the last part is, well, not the last part, but the QAQC review. After you get your department approval, the project engineer should compile and print all QAQC documents, plans, estimates, report, calculations, checklist, approval forms, for all disciplines. And then you submit it back to the PM for one final review. And it's the PM there. Now he's looking for cohesiveness, back checking things, making sure that the actual presentation and our submittal is complete, it's thorough, it's accurate. And then that next step is what we officially document in the project folder. The part that often is skipped is the process of documenting what we actually submit and having those all in one folder and easily accessible from somebody else at a later time. So as we're back checking, making a submittal and documenting it, we want to know exactly what was reviewed, who reviewed it. We have the forms all prepared and it's in the QAQC folder of the project directory. And it should all be there in each, as you're making the submittal, the project folder has a separate QAQC and it should all be in there so that you can have like a little snapshot of the entire process that was made. Here's a kind of a workflow diagram of the 4 steps. The first, again, the QAQC, and it flows through. If it has to go back in step 3 because plan revisions weren't accepted, it goes just back to step 2 and we redo the whole thing. And I just can't stress enough, the purple step here is documenting the actual submittal, and I'll get into some specifics that we should be looking for in to documenting these things. But even if it's just an email or here's a PDF set of what was reviewed, here's the comments, and it's just something there. But more times than not, I see those folders empty. And it appears that maybe something wasn't done or we're just not documenting it. So that's very, very important. So what do we need to submit for the formal process? One is a complete submittal package. Each client or each discipline or each county may have different submittal guidelines of what you need to submit, and they have their own checklist. You have to figure that out and follow those applicable guidelines for those checklists for that certain agency or jurisdiction. There's also milestone checklists that we've developed for each discipline for traffic, highway, drainage, structures, water resources, and that's more or less a exercise to have a project engineer or design engineer go through the plan set to make sure that we're including everything that needs to be included. I'll go over those forms and where they're located shortly, but this is kind of a rundown of what to submit. Yeah, here's the actual location. Again, it's on the P drive, QAQC folder, and there's a checklist and forms. And it's broken down by discipline and by milestone, and you can find all those forms there. The first is the submittal checklist. We don't have to do hard copy sets anymore. I'm pretty sure we're mostly electronic, but either way, hard copy versus PDF, it's the same thing. But you can check here for a milestone. We want a full plan set, whether it's electronic or hard copy. We want a hard copy of the estimate, any comment responses that we need to include, any specs, any supplemental design calculations or assumptions, and then a complete milestone checklist, which includes, traffic, highway, depending on what milestone, or if it's for a permit agency, again, it's the same plan set, a report, usually a stormwater report or some type of H&H report, comment responses from the agency, and then any supplemental design information. And all of those should be PDF'd and just sandwiched into the QAQC submittal folder for that milestone. Again, here the permit agencies have their own checklists, forms, applications. So make sure you're including those because it varies between jurisdictions. The signature approval form. This should be usually the project engineer is the originator, so they'll fill this out. The reviewer is the department head, or if it's assigned to another project manager in that department, they could be the reviewer. Project manager is typically the back checker. And then if it's multidiscipline, this is where the other departments will sign off on that they've reviewed it. They're okay with it. It's been back checked and we're good with our submittal. So these are all the things that should be included in the QAQC folder. This is an example milestone checklist. This happens to be a highway one. I understand this is very tedious and sometimes it may seem it's not important, and maybe it's not for somebody with 7-8 years experience who has gone through dozens and dozens of plan development submittals. But these checklists here are kind of just a quick snapshot of what exactly should be included in a submittal based on. So this is a final design plan checklist for highway. And on the title sheet, you should have all those things. The index of sheets, you should have all those. So, and it goes by sheet. If you actually go into the QAQC folder for checklists, and it's, pretty comprehensive. And there's one for water resources, structures has their own. So it's not just one size fits all type of checklist. It's kind of broken out by disciplines and what type of milestone. It's a useful tool for somebody who has never actually gone through the plan development process from start to finish of a project, because sometimes that could take several years, if not more, for a certain project. Documentation. So this is often overlooked, like I've said, it's forgotten or just incomplete. The submittal should be saved on every project directory. There should be a QAQC folder. So if we have a blank example project folder on the P drive, I think it's called new project folder, anytime, and the project managers or somebody else should be creating these directories. So you don't have to do that if you're, not one of those people, but there should be a QAQC folder and there should be a milestones and a permitting folder. So that's where we want to save this stuff. If it goes through the formal process, if it doesn't have to go through it, we should still save some things in there, but it's up to the project manager on how to document that stuff. Don't place these documents in the formal QAQC submittal folder. They should be there's a peer review folder. That's where that stuff should go. However, if the project did not go through the formal QAQC process, then the review should be either by a PM or the department director should be documented in the project folder in some fashion, just for our documentation purposes. What do we want to document? Scan PDFs or markups or Bluebeam comments, the approval signature form that we talked about. I'm going to go over to this action item list shortly. That's very important. Your milestone checklist, your submittal checklist, and then a copy of the actual submittal. What after we made the corrections and markups were addressed, we actually have a final product that's being submitted. That should be included there as well, so that we kind of have a side-by-side comparison. So that's what we want to document, these bullets here. There's an example folder, again, in the P drive QAQC. I encourage you all to just browse that folder to get up to speed on various things, but there's kind of an example of what we want to see documented. Here's an example. So here's a filled out submittal checklist. For this project, this is Maryland 410 at 212. We have project number, we have a 30% submittal. We did hard copies, we did an estimate. We had no comment responses because it was 30%, so maybe there was no comment responses that were needed. Contract specs we didn't need because sometimes at 30%, you don't have to do that. But we did include supplemental calcs and design information in a hard copy of the completed milestone. Here's a example of the signed approval form. It's filled out, engineer's name, project numbers, the date that it was reviewed, and then signatures of all the various disciplines that were there. And it should be signed by the engineer, the reviewer, the back checker, and each department that was involved on that certain plan. Here's a completed milestone checklist. Again, it's just, filling out the names and engineer and whether or not each was included on the plan set. This action item list, like I've gone over before, but I always had this as part of when I was managing projects is an action item list, and I love to keep it in that QAQC folder. It's basically just a snapshot of the project after you make the submittal, because there's no guarantee that these things come back in a timely fashion. More times than not, once you make a submittal, you may not have the project reactivated for 5 months, 6 months, maybe a year. And if we develop these action item lists for a project at a submittal, it's kind of just a pause button for the project, so that when somebody comes back to it, however long after we make a submittal, it's a refresher to let them know what they didn't do yet, what still needs to be done. Maybe you couldn't do all the things you needed before 30%, and it's kind of just a refresher, so that once the project restarts, you can go through this and say, like, oh yeah, I remember I needed to do, we needed these details, or we needed to figure out a cost for this, or we still need offset tables for sidewalk. Or on the flip side of it, maybe there's another engineer going to be working on the project that wasn't involved in 30%. And this little list here for them is very crucial and a good learning thing for them. So as they pick up a project that somebody else may have done, this is a very good list for them to say, like, okay, I see that they still need to do X, Y, and Z. And it's a good learning tool for them, so that they're not trying to figure out all this stuff themselves, because I'm sure most of you have been involved on projects that somebody else started and then you pick it up halfway through, and it could take you days to go through the project documents and the correspondence to figure out why decisions were made, why they did this. where the files are located, what still needs to be done. So this is just a quick way of expediting that process and being a little more efficient. So this action item list, I highly encourage every project to have one, and just throw it right there in the QAQC folder for that submittal. And it's there for whoever needs it. And if the project starts a year later, the information there is still useful. I already talked over this stuff. Here's just an example of just something, a markup of what the process is for reviewing things. This could be saved. This is from Bluebeam. But these documents and revisions and markups will generate PDFs, and those will be saved as a documentation for the comments that were generated. And you could also have the back-checked version of it through Bluebeam, so that the comments here in red, the back-checked version, they'll be green, or so on and so forth. So there's a trail of what was commented on and what was revised. Important components to think of. So the time required to do this process varies by project. Some smaller projects that are maybe just one discipline, it could be 1 day, 1 or 2 days. Larger complex projects that have highway and structures and traffic and water resources that are 90 to 100 sheets in the plan set, it could take up to 2 weeks. So having that kind of mentality in your mind helps you set realistic QAQC dates. And basically it's up to the PM for that project to be conscious of those review periods. So if we know that we have a PI submittal on, October 30th of this year, we really should be having internal review dates at least 7 days out before our actual submittal to the client, if not more. The last thing we want to do is have a large, complex project, and then have 1 day to review it and expect to meet the deadline. So we want to avoid those in all instances. I understand that maybe not 9 times out of 10, but the majority of the time we're under a time crunch, and that's just the nature of the business. So there's ways that we can internally shrink that 7 to 14-day review period into a more manageable time constraint based off of other submittals and other projects. And, if we're under a time crunch, those could be concurrent reviews by the PM and the department director. Once a project engineer has something ready, shoots it off to both people and they can do concurrent reviews, or several over-the-shoulder reviews by the PM as plans are finished. As you finish your alignment and you cut your cross sections, the cross sections are done, but we're still working on something else. Let's take a look at the cross sections as they're finished. Or reviewing partial packages instead of waiting for the 100%. Now, this is not the ideal thing to do every single time, but those are manageable things that we can do in the event, because it's going to happen when a submittal creeps up on us and we're struggling to have a thorough review but still meet a submittal deadline. So you could review partial packages. Highway design is done, structures are done, but water resources is still trying to figure out some of their pipe profiles. So let's review everything but that, and we'll come back to it. As long as we're communicating and collaborating, we all are on the same page and we know what's going to be done. So those are ways that we can expedite it so it's not as time consuming, but those are not that shouldn't be the norm. It should just be on a case by case, depending on workloads and stuff. Either way, that regardless, just because a project has a tight schedule, or we're shifting staff and they're kind of jumbling between the various projects, it's still not an excuse not to disregard a review. It still has to be done. We'll figure it out. We meet, every 2 weeks with department directors, and that's the area, that's the time they can express concern over a schedule, or they need additional resources, or pull in some other people from other departments to help make a submittal. That's when we can kind of coordinate that work, so that when the submittal actually occurs, it's not news to anybody. It was known, and we tried to make the adjustments as early as possible. So that's the goal. So your resources for this, again, P Drive, QAQC. There you can find the forms, the checklist, the procedures, this presentation, and other things that are in there, example folders and whatnot. And then P Drive Engineering Resources. This is a very useful folder. If you've never been there or haven't been in a while, I encourage you, because people have been adding to this over the years, and there's a lot of information there about design standards and resources, and our CAD standards training, and just various, if Howard County has design procedures, there's various things in there. So I encourage you guys to look at these two folders. And with that, I am done the presentation, and I'll open it up to questions if anybody has any.
Yeah, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. So like as you discussed, these systems and processes for QAQC exist, and people should be doing them. But I mean, as you've kind of discussed, in cases you can't, or people just aren't doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to play the pessimist here. If people aren't required to do something or forced to do something, they won't do it. So, and I don't necessarily need an answer to this question now, just maybe something to think about for the management side. Like, how are we going to hold people accountable to doing this? And then what's going to be the consequence if it's not done?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, because I usually the just through experience, just knowing how it plays out, sometimes there'll be an uptick of QAQC in the short term here, and over the course of a year, there'll be various different things and reasons that projects fall through the loops, or and it starts lacking by a project or a department or just a few people. And the way that it could be enforced is by the department directors and project managers going into that submittal folder and seeing the documentation, if it's there or not. And if it's not there, asking what happened, why isn't it there? And if it is there, then we have proof that it is being done. So people should be able to spot check this, to go through and see whether or not, and I'll occasionally do it myself, and just go through a project folder and go to submittals for a QAQC. And if I see a folder, I know they made a submittal, and I see the folder's empty, then some follow-up is going to have to be, some follow-up is going to have to happen to see why it wasn't documented. Because one, it's either they just haven't had time to do it yet, but the process was done, or two, they just skipped it. And accountability then was one of those little bubbles there. has to come by the people working on the project to know what should be done and actually go through and be doing it. And like I said, it's unfair for one department to be following these procedures and making sure that it's being done, whereas another department may not be doing that, and it's not fair, and that's where the teamwork comes in. So it wasn't a very riveting topic today. I hope I held everyone's attention for a little bit, but it is. I think that the one thing that you can leave here, it's maybe not just the hard deliverables that we're giving these clients, it's also your daily interaction with them. That also is quality. So being responsive, being thorough with your response, engaging with the client, letting them, staying ahead and being proactive with the client. Maybe not all of you are dealing with the clients on a day-to-day basis, but that is also part of the quality, aside from, developing plans and cost estimates and stuff. It's also being responsive and proactive and thorough. So kind of meshing those two together is kind of the goal there in terms of project development, quality, and making sure the client's happy. So if there's no other questions, then I thank you all, and I believe Katie recorded this, so it will probably be on the YouTube channel at some point. Yes, he's recorded. So thank you all, and if you got any questions, you can stop by or send me an email separately. We'll go from there. Guess everybody's sleeping.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, see you guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.